Everything you think you know about death is a story someone told you to make sense of what none of us fully understand. But stories have a way of becoming walls, especially when we cling to them for comfort. You've heard the common ones. The bright tunnel, the pearly gates, the reincarnated monk in a child's body. And yet, when the house grows quiet and you're left alone with your thoughts, a question lingers just beneath the surface. What if none of them are the full truth? What if death is not an end at all but a process we keep repeating because we keep forgetting how to wake up inside it? There's an ancient manuscript that few in the West have truly studied, though its teachings are beginning to catch the eye of neuroscientists and quantum theorists alike. It's called the Bardo Thodol, better known as the Tibetan Book of the Dead. For centuries, monks used it not to teach fear of dying but to prepare the mind for what comes next. Not symbolically, not metaphorically, literally. And what it reveals is radical. The moment the heart stops, consciousness does not. In fact, according to this text, that moment is just the beginning of a journey. You are not gone. You are aware. Intensely so. This may sound mystical at first, but science is starting to catch up. In 2013, researchers at the University of Michigan observed a surge in brain activity in rats in the 30 seconds after clinical death. What they found was a burst of gamma waves associated with conscious perception occurring even after the heart had stopped. This has led to growing speculation that consciousness may not be a mere byproduct of the brain, but a field the brain accesses, like a radio tuning into a signal. If that's true, then death is not a blackout. It is a transition. And the first phase of that transition, described in the Bardo Thodol, is what Tibetan mystics call the Chikai Bardo, a moment of clarity so pure that if you can recognize it, you are free from the cycle of rebirth entirely. Picture it like this. Imagine stepping outside your house only to realize you had been dreaming you were locked inside for decades. The air is crisp, the sky is infinite, and a light more brilliant than anything you've seen floods your awareness. That light, according to the text, is your true nature, pure, undistorted awareness. Not the voice in your head, not your memories, not your name or your age, but the witnessing presence behind all of it. If you recognize it, if you don't flinch, cling, or run, you dissolve back into it. Not in annihilation, but in return. Liberation. But here's the catch. Most of us don't recognize it. Why? Because we are not prepared. Because we spent a lifetime identifying with our roles, our possessions, our unresolved wounds. So in that instant after death, instead of surrendering to the light, we hesitate. The same way we hesitated to say what mattered, to forgive what hurt, to let go of control when it was time. That moment of clinging closes the first door and the cycle begins again. The implications here are enormous. Not just philosophically, practically, because if the moment of death reflects the patterns we carried through life, then how we live now directly shapes what comes next. Every time you pause in a quiet room and feel that presence within you, every time you catch yourself reacting from fear and choose awareness instead, you're practicing for that final moment. You are literally training the mind to recognize its true nature not as an idea, but as a lived experience. And here's where the application becomes tangible. Mindfulness is not some trendy wellness tool. It is spiritual rehearsal. Breathing deeply when you're angry, softening when you're scared, choosing presence when distraction is easier. These are not minor acts. They are the groundwork for freedom. They teach the mind to sit still in front of the mirror of death and not look away. Neuroscience now tells us that the brain maintains a kind of residual awareness even after clinical death. Studies at NYU Langone have documented detailed recollections from cardiac arrest survivors' reports of floating above their bodies, of feeling fully alert, of witnessing events that were later verified. These aren't hallucinations. They're windows, evidence, perhaps, that consciousness isn't extinguished, to set free. And that means your life right now is the training ground. Not your past, not some distant future. This moment, as you sit in your chair, feel the breath in your chest, and hear the quiet rhythm of the world around you, you are in the first Bardo already. The Bardo is not just a post-mortem state, it is the state of mind we carry when we are asleep to our awareness. And the only way out is to wake up deliberately, repeatedly, with care. So ask yourself, what are you clinging to that you would carry into death? What part of your identity feels too heavy to let go? This is not a question for monks on mountains. It is a question for you, for anyone who has lost sleep over regret, who has wondered where the time went, who has felt the ache of something unfinished in the soul. The Bardo teaches us that death is not the test. Life is, and if we can learn to meet life with open eyes and a still mind, then when death comes, it will feel less like an end and more like remembering something we always knew but forgot. You've made it this far. You're listening. That's already the beginning. Stay awake. Stay curious. And when that moment comes, perhaps, just perhaps, you'll recognize the light. Imagine for a moment that you have just taken your last breath. The heart stills. The body falls quiet. But what happens next is not silence. It is awareness. Immediate, vivid, unfiltered. According to the Bardo Thodol, the ancient Tibetan text handed down by generations of spiritual scientists, this is the moment where consciousness continues not in some distant afterlife, but in a dimension shaped entirely by the mind. This isn't a religious belief. It's a map, and that map is starting to align with what modern science is beginning to uncover. Recent studies in near-death experiences, including large-scale clinical investigations like the AWARE study by Dr. Sam Parnia at NYU Langone, have shown that people who were declared clinically dead could later describe precise details of what was happening around them during resuscitation, even when their brains were inactive by medical standards. These experiences often begin with a sense of clarity and detachment, followed by a flood of visions, emotions, and images that feel more real than life itself. The Tibetan masters would say this is the second stage of the Bardo, the Konyi Bardo, the realm of visions. But these visions are not random. They are symbolic. They arise from your own mind, projected outward like light through a prism. Think of it like a dream, but one where every image is a reflection of your emotional and psychological patterns. If you've carried anger, you may see terrifying forms. If you've cultivated peace, you may see radiant beings. But none of it is coming to you. It's coming from you. And here's the part that's both terrifying and empowering. You are creating it all in real time. Just like dreams reflect unresolved thoughts and feelings from waking life, the Konyi Bardo reflects your entire psyche, magnified and made visible. That's why the Tibetan text says these divine beings that appear peaceful or wrathful are not gods. They are archetypes, psychological forces wearing symbolic faces. The first being you may encounter is Vairocana, surrounded by a blinding white light. This light isn't decoration. It is clarity, truth, the raw essence of who you are beyond all stories. But few can face it. Why? Because to stand in that light is to see yourself stripped bare. No titles, no roles, no masks, just awareness, pure, immense, uncompromising. And if your mind still clings to identity, to name, to form, to history, you will flinch. And in that flinch, you turn away. A second light appears. Softer, dimmer, warmer. It feels more familiar. It offers the comfort of narrative, the illusion of self, the hope of return. That's the light of rebirth. And this moment is critical. This is not punishment. It's not judgment. It's choice disguised as emotion. You aren't being told what to do. You are being shown what you still believe. Neuroscientists studying brain function during altered states, whether through meditation, psychedelics, or dying, have observed that the default mode network, the part of the brain most involved in self-referencing and storytelling, becomes disrupted. In those moments, many report the dissolution of ego, the sense that the self is just a story. And when that story slips, either you wake up or you reach for something to hold on to. The Konyi Bardo tests your ability to let go, not of your possessions, but of the false self you've built around them. And here's where it becomes immediately practical. Because this process doesn't only begin after death. It begins every time you're given a moment of truth and choose comfort instead. When you avoid the mirror because you don't like what you see. When you distract yourself from a feeling that's too hard to face. When you tell yourself the same old story because the truth would require change. Each of these is a rehearsal, a small bardo, a moment when you are given the choice to recognize your awareness or follow the familiar light of forgetting. And so the work begins now. If you're over 65, you've already walked through 1,000 of these moments. Some you passed, some you turned away from. But here's the miracle. It's not too late. The brain's neuroplasticity doesn't vanish with age. You can still train the mind. You can still learn to recognize when your emotions are driving perception. Start simple. When you feel fear, pause and observe it. Ask, what am I really afraid of losing? When you feel pride, ask, what part of me still needs approval? These questions aren't philosophical riddles. They are keys. They're what allow you to walk into the mirror of the Bardo and not flinch. And when you can do that in life, you will know how to do it in death. So the next time you feel that subtle pull towards something safe but false, remember, that soft light isn't salvation. It's seduction. And the only way out is through truth. Recognize the projection. Let it pass. And trust that beneath all the noise, there is something in you that already knows the way home. By the time you reach the third stage of the Bardo, the visions are no longer strange or symbolic, they become familiar, deeply personal, and emotionally charged. This is not the realm of dazzling lights or divine beings. It is the realm of reflection, where the universe holds up a mirror not to your face, but to your life. And in that mirror you don't see what you achieved or what others thought of you, you see what drove you. Beneath the surface, beyond the masks we wear even to ourselves, there exists a raw and unfiltered truth. The Tibetan masters knew that this phase is not about judgment from an outside force. It is about honesty with oneself. It is the moment when the weight of everything unresolved begins to rise like sediment in still water. And here's what makes it even more powerful. This stage does not wait for death to begin. You have felt it already. That moment you looked in the mirror and couldn't hold your own gaze. That silence after a harsh word you can't take back. That uneasy feeling in your chest when you remember something you thought you had buried. In those moments, the mind is whispering the same truth the Bardo shouts: you are not free from what you have not faced. From a scientific perspective, this aligns closely with the psychological principle of emotional repression. Decades of research in psychoneuroimmunology have shown that unprocessed emotions, especially shame, guilt, and chronic stress, can manifest physically in the body, contributing to inflammation, disease, and even cognitive decline. The brain doesn't forget. The body doesn't forget. Your nervous system becomes a living archive of everything you've postponed. And in this third stage of the Bardo, those repressed energies come back not to punish, but to be seen. Picture standing in a vast, empty space with no sound, no color, no movement. Suddenly, you feel a presence. It does not speak. It does not accuse. But in its stillness, you see clearly the patterns of avoidance, the truths you softened into half-truths, the decisions you made from fear but justified with logic. And in front of you, a light appears once more. Not the brilliant, pure light from earlier, but something heavier, dimmer, more emotional. It carries with it the frequency of blame, resentment, and longing. Tells you gently that you can try again, start over, but at a cost. Because this pull isn't toward freedom. It's toward repetition. Toward a new life shaped entirely by what you refused to let go of. This is what the Tibetans meant when they spoke of karmic gravity. And it's not mystical language, it's neurobiological fact. Your default reactions, when repeated over time, form neural pathways. The more you act out of fear, avoidance, or self-denial, the more entrenched those patterns become. In the absence of awareness, you don't choose your future. Your conditioning chooses it for you. And here lies the urgency. If you do not consciously release these emotional charges in life, they will shape your next experience, whether that's in the moment after death or the next conflict, the next decision, the next regret. But there is a path through. It begins with radical self-honesty, not self-blame, not wallowing in shame, but quiet recognition. Start by noticing when you flinch emotionally, when someone says something and you bristle, when a memory arises and you change the subject. These are portals, the mind's way of showing you where it's still holding tension. Neuroscience calls this interoception, the ability to perceive internal sensations, and it can be trained. Studies have shown that mindfulness and body-based practices like slow, conscious breathing or somatic awareness can increase emotional regulation and decrease reactivity in the amygdala, the brain's fear center, which means that by simply pausing, breathing, And naming what you feel, you are loosening the grip of the unconscious. You are preparing the mind to face its own mirror without running. And that's the key. This isn't about becoming perfect. It's about becoming present. If you are over 65, you've likely carried certain patterns for decades. But neuroplasticity doesn't disappear with age, it only demands more patience. So ask yourself, what is the truth I've avoided because it hurt too much to feel? What have I repeated out of comfort that no longer serves me? What emotion, if faced fully, might set me free? These are not easy questions, but they are liberating ones. And if the Bardo Thodol is right, these are the very questions that determine whether you wake up or cycle through again. You are not being tested by a god or a judge. You are being invited by your own awareness to return to wholeness, to see clearly, to let go. And the choice begins now in the smallest of moments, in how you sit with yourself when no one's watching, in whether you cling to the old or dare to release it. The next light you see will not ask for your story. It will ask for your truth. So take this time while you still breathe to practice the art of release, to stand in front of your inner mirror without looking away. Because if you can meet yourself there fully, the next stage won't trap you, it will set you free. At this point in the journey through the Bardo, something shifts not just in tone, but in pressure. The first stages offered clarity, then confrontation. Now the system becomes cunning. If the early doors were closed because we flinched from the truth, now the trap is comfort itself. The Tibetan masters wrote that this stage is where the illusions stop confronting you and start seducing you. Not with chaos or fear, but with longing, pride, and familiarity. Imagine standing in a space where you begin to remember things that once mattered, moments of success, of recognition, of feeling valued. You may even recall the pride in a job well done, the respect of others, or the sense of mattering to someone. And for a fleeting second, you feel powerful again. But here lies the danger. In this realm, power is not freedom. It's exposure. The more you cling to the image of who you think you were, the more visible your attachment becomes, and the more energy is drawn into reinforcing the illusion. This isn't a warning from mythology, it aligns with what psychology has long known. Studies in ego depletion and identity attachment show that the stronger our emotional investment in a fixed self-image, the harder it becomes to adapt, to learn, or to release old patterns. The work of Carol Dweck on fixed versus growth mindsets illustrates this beautifully. When we define ourselves by achievements or appearances, we create a mental rigidity that resists change. And in the Bardo, resistance is gravity, pulls us back into the cycle. The mind, left untrained, clings to what is known, even if it's limiting. That's why this stage presents not monsters but mirrors, not trauma but temptation. You feel the pull of another chance, another role, another name. It doesn't feel like a trap. It feels like purpose. But it's not purpose, it's inertia. Because in this space, craving disguises itself as meaning. You remember the house you built, the family you loved, the ambitions you pursued. And your mind whispers, just one more try, just one more life to get it right. What you don't see is that the craving itself is what locks the door. Emotion, unobserved, becomes choice. Neuroscience confirms this through the work of Antonio Damasio and others who've shown that decision-making is deeply intertwined with emotional memory. The emotions we carry even unconsciously guide our behavior, often without awareness. In the Bardo, this becomes destiny. You are not deciding your next life by thought, but by vibration, by what still resonates with you. If you never dealt with the grief of a lost parent, or the bitterness of an old betrayal, or the pride in how people saw you, those feelings become magnetic. They draw you toward a new life that reflects those unresolved truths. And here's where the application becomes clear. This isn't abstract mysticism. It is emotional physics. What you cling to shapes what comes next. So the practice in this life is not to become empty or detached. It is to become honest. When pride arises, recognize it. When longing calls, pause before following. When comfort appears, ask if it is freedom or familiarity. The more you build this habit now, the more skill you bring into the next transition. Practical tools help. Journaling is not just therapy, it's cognitive offloading, a way of separating story from identity. Mindful breathing is not just stress relief, it's training the nervous system to stay grounded when the familiar voice of the ego starts whispering. Even simple reflection, like asking before sleep, "What emotion drove me today?" builds the muscle of awareness. If you are in the later decades of life, you carry more emotional weight than most. But you also carry more wisdom. Now is the time to use it. Reflect on what still stirs your heart uncomfortably. Is it a relationship never healed? A truth never spoken? A part of yourself you've hidden? These are the entry points. Not to fix the past, but to unhook from it. Because if the Bardo is right, those hooks are what shape your next form. And if science is right, your brain and body are already showing you what needs to be released. You may not need another lesson in effort. You may need a lesson in surrender. And that surrender begins with seeing things as they are, not as you wish they were. So the next time a memory arises that makes you feel unfinished, don't bury it. Sit with it. Breathe with it. Let it rise without reaching for it. Because in that moment, you are rehearsing the ultimate release. You are preparing to stand in front of the final light and not flinch. You are breaking the momentum of craving with the stillness of truth. And perhaps that stillness is not the end of the story, but the space where a new kind of awareness begins. By the time we arrive at the final stage of the Bardo, the cycle is nearly complete, not because some cosmic force demands it, but because our own momentum has brought us here. What began as flashes of light and moments of choice has now softened into a gentle, almost invisible pull. The earlier visions were intense, even overwhelming, but this stage is subtle and far more dangerous because it feels like home. You begin to sense warmth, a voice you once loved, the smell of your father's jacket, the sound of your childhood laughter echoing through a memory that doesn't quite belong to now. The mind, no longer fighting, begins to surrender to the familiar. But what feels like grace may, in fact, be gravity. This moment is the quiet turning point, the final breath before form returns. According to the Tibetan tradition, this is the phase where karmic energy begins shaping the contours of your next life. And karma here does not mean punishment or reward. It means resonance. The emotions, attachments, and identifications you never resolved begin acting like magnets, pulling your consciousness toward the body, the parents, the life that most mirrors your unfinished story. This is not myth. It mirrors what epigenetic science is now revealing, that emotional trauma and behavioral tendencies can be passed across generations not only through learned behavior but through biological imprinting. Research from institutions like Emory University has demonstrated that mice conditioned to fear a certain scent passed that fear on to their offspring through changes in gene expression, without direct experience. Now imagine what unresolved grief, guilt, or longing might do to the resonance of a human consciousness preparing to return. The body you move into, the conditions you are born into, are not random. They match the internal frequency you carried when the last door closed. But here's the empowering truth. Even now, even this far into the process, there is still a window. A final opportunity to wake up, to remember that what is pulling you is not fate but familiarity, not necessity but attachment. And the practice, even in life, is the same. You pause. You recognize. You do not reach. In mindfulness meditation, we are taught to observe the arising of thoughts and sensations without clinging or aversion. This practice, backed by decades of neuroscience, has been shown to rewire the brain's response to discomfort and craving. The anterior cingulate cortex and prefrontal regions involved in emotional regulation grow more active, while the default mode network, the seat of egoic self-narration, quiets down. In simple terms, when you practice staying aware without reacting, you weaken the automatic pull of your past stories. This is not just good for your mental health. It may be the very skill that determines whether you return to another life out of habit, or step beyond the cycle entirely. If you are in your later years, you have seen many endings and many beginnings. Perhaps you've buried loved ones, closed chapters, lived through grief and transformation. But this stage of the Bardo reminds us that nothing truly ends unless it is fully seen. The doorway does not close with violence. It closes with forgetting. So what are you still remembering that defines who you think you are? What moments still tug at your heart, not because they need to be held, but because they need to be released? When we speak of letting go, we often mistake it for indifference. But the wisdom of both science and ancient teachings tells us that true release comes not from resistance, but from recognition. You see the image, you feel the longing, but you do not follow. You breathe, you soften, and in that quiet moment, the pattern breaks. You are no longer being pulled. You are watching the pull and choosing stillness instead. And that choice is not abstract. It is everything. It is the difference between returning to a story already written and stepping into awareness beyond narrative. This is the moment when forgetting becomes form, when form becomes identity, and when identity becomes another life. But if you can hold presence just a moment longer, if you can recognize that what you're seeing is your own mind reaching for comfort, you can walk through the final doorway with your eyes open. So the practice is now. While you still breathe, while you can still observe your habits, name your patterns, and release what no longer serves you. In the stillness of each breath, you rehearse the freedom of this final test. And perhaps that is what liberation has always been, not a gift from the heavens, but a skill we were born to remember.